Thank you for joining us this morning as we look back on 2023 and into the year ahead for 2024. I'd like to begin this morning by acknowledging that BRC and myself are headquartered in the traditional territory of Treaty 7. These are the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and it is also home to Region 3 of the Métis Nation of Alberta. However, we are all joining from across the country and in different places and have our own unique connection to the land. I'd like to encourage everybody today to share where you're joining from in the chat, and take a moment to think about our own unique connections to the land around us. I'd just like to quickly start by introducing myself. My name is Jordan Dye, and I'm the Director of the Business Renewable Centre of Canada. The Business Renewable Centre of Canada is an initiative of the Pembina Institute and a charity focused on accelerating the adoption of corporate procurement. Just quickly, for those who are not part of the BRC network and are just joining today, why BRC? Well, this is an example today of some of the great things we get to do, which is provide educational content primarily to our buyer organizations, those corporations that are interested in entering into PPAs, power purchase agreements, to address their scope 2 emissions, which are indirect GHG emissions that are a result of an organization's energy use. We also provide educational next slide, please. We also provide educational resources for companies, as well as network events, and then educational sessions like the webinar you're joining us for today. One of the biggest highlights of BRC is our PPA deal tracker. We have the most comprehensive tracker of corporate PPA deals in Canada. As you can see, 2023, next slide. We don't, as you will see later, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here and promoting what Margaret's going to dive into later, but you will see 2023 was an amazing year for PPA deals in Alberta. And just quickly on touching on the BRC model, we're a double-sided network that combines both the energy buyers, those corporations looking to enter into PPAs, with some of the largest developers in the country and new entrants into the market. This provides unique opportunities for us to provide, as I said, educational events, as well as networking events throughout the year. And for everybody on this call, I'd just like to promo that information on our 2024 Spring Forum will be coming out soon. So stay tuned for that as we look forward to our second annual event and another exciting year. If we can just go to the next slide, please. The BRC community has industries from across the Canadian economy, from telecommunications to oil and gas, public institutions, and retail. With over 55 members, that represents a diverse cross-section of the Canadian economy and really shows how Canadian corporations are stepping forward to take action on climate. So if you're not a part of BRC yet, I will be reaching out at the end of this webinar, and I'd love to set up a chat to talk about how we can bring you into the BRC fold and the benefits of joining. Next slide, please. Before I turn it over to our amazing panelists today, I just want to highlight some of the amazing things that have happened this year. And to say the least, 2023 was an eventful year. Anybody in the renewable energy space or even just slightly adjacent understands that. And despite some of the policy commotion in Alberta, it was a record-breaking year. We saw new market entrants and some repeat customers push to make 2023 the biggest year for PPAs ever in terms of energy produced. And the team is going to dive into some of those questions later. Renewable energy backed by corporate deals in Alberta now produces the same amount of energy as consumed by all residential households in the province. And I think that's an amazing accomplishment that we've hit this year. Next slide, please. Back in 2022, BRC set a new goal. After blowing through our initial goal, we had to look ahead and say what was really going to push us and push the industry. And so we set a 10 gigawatt goal of capacity purchase through corporate PPAs by 2030. We're well on our way to hitting that goal, and recent developments across the country provide more opportunities for buyers. However, I'm going to turn it over to our experts today to dig into all of this and share with you our look back at 2023 and our look forward for 2024. Next slide, please. First, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce two of BRC's strongest team members, Margaret Neliseri, Margaret is an analyst with BRC Canada. She has an MSc in Sustainable Energy Development from the University of Calgary. For those who follow BRC, you're probably aware of our municipal tax revenue sheet that was released at the end of last year and was widely cited. And this is thanks to Margaret's amazing work on that project. And we look forward to her second update in June. Carson Fong is the program manager at BRC and was last year our senior analyst. Carson has done some excellent work on bringing our deal tracker forward, working on other initiatives across the program, and I'm excited to have him move into the program manager role. He has experience across the sustainability landscape, including sustainable finance, engineering design, and renewable energy development. And we look forward to bringing both of these experts to the fore. Next slide. And finally, we have Benjamin Thibault. Sorry, I have a rental tongue today. I know I've said this too many times, but anyways, Ben is a senior advisor with Prairie Sky and provides regulatory expertise for BRC as we look at Alberta and other jurisdictions. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret so Margaret can let us know what was the recap of 2023.
Thanks, Jordan. Shannon, we can go on to the next slide. Great. Okay. So 2023 was a significant year for renewable energy production, mainly thanks to power purchase agreements and especially the voluntary market. But how did this happen? Was it a year for wind or solar projects? And what industries were major players? We're going to dive right into BRC Canada's deal tracker to answer all these questions and see what PPAs look like in 2023. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So yeah, this is our deal tracker. Many of you already know about the deal tracker. It's one of our most valued resources. We basically record every PPA deal that happens in Canada that falls under our inclusion criteria. The basic version of the tracker that's publicly available is what you see on the screen, and it shows you the deals split by type and year. As of December last year, PPA deals have cumulatively purchased 3.3 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, and around 1 gigawatt is just from 2023 alone. This 1 gigawatt is directly attributed to 9 deals that took place throughout 2023. And might I add, every deal involved a BRC participant, either a buyer or a developer. We saw deals happening throughout all the quarters of the year, and following last year's trend, wind significantly outplayed solar, ending the year with one of the largest procurement deals made till now in Alberta, the 415 megawatts Buffalo Plains wind project. You'll be able to get more insights into the deal tracker through the participant version, but when closely looking at some of these deals, 2023 saw a balance of experienced and new buyers. Some of the experienced buyers include Amazon, Synovus, Microsoft that contracted larger wind deals. And the new buyers, to name a few, include Government of Canada, Gibson Energy, Lafarge, who took part in a mix of smaller wind and solar deals. Next slide, please. Even though the capacity of deals contracted last year was less than what was contracted in 2021, 2023 was the largest procurement by energy production so far. In total, around 3.9 gigawatts hour of energy was contracted just in 2023 alone, more than what we saw in 2021. And this is because of the stronger role wind played in 2023's mix and because of its higher capacity factor. We can look at wind's performance more closely on the graph on the right. The lines are cumulative and show the total wind or solar energy procured through PPAs, and the bars show the yearly numbers. When we look at the split between wind and solar, wind shot past solar in 2021 and picked up even more in 2022. And now we're seeing almost 4 times more energy is being produced cumulatively in the corporate procurement market by wind than solar. Some of the other trends worth mentioning are that the wind deals are much larger than solar, mainly due to the sizes of the projects that they're backed with. We've also observed that the average deal size of wind has increased from around 100 megawatts to 137 megawatts, while solar deal sizes remain steadily on the lower side, around 35 megawatts. We've also noticed that the trend of deal stacking being continued this year as well, with 2 deals contracted from projects that was announced last year. We are also observing that the project sizes are becoming larger than the wind volumes. This can be attributed to the fact that more developers are comfortable taking the merchant position with a part of their projects exposed to the market price risk. We only saw 2 deals that were contracted. Their complete project capacity was contracted. And around 29% of the capacity of the projects associated with PPAs could be merchant. The 3.3 gigawatts of capacity procured through power purchase agreements supports more than 4.1 gigawatts of project capacity across Alberta till date. I know I'm using a lot of renewable energy lingo here, and a lot of us are not used to it, but just for that reason, we had introduced the renewable energy glossary that can be used by buyers or developers or anyone wanting to decipher these terms used in the renewable energy space. And this can be found on our resources page on our website. Next slide, please. Now I want to dive a little bit into the voluntary and compliance market. In the early years after government procurements demonstrated the low cost of procuring wind and solar under long-term contracts, we saw that there was a strong demand driven by compliance with Alberta's TIER program, which is the industrial carbon pricing regime that allows emitters to buy offsets from new renewables. In 2021, this compliance market more than doubled the voluntary market, and in terms of energy, with a strong orientation toward wind. But last year, in 2023, this narrative is sort of reversed, where we saw companies in the voluntary market completely steer corporate procurement and procured more than 2.5 gigawatt per year, more than doubling the compliance market. And we observe that this can be attributed to the increased number of companies trying to meet their emissions or their climate targets and the increasing weight on corporate sustainability performance. But the compliance market has not completely paused either. With more than 1 gigawatt hour energy produced through deals, the compliance market introduced a new industry to corporate procurement in 2023, the cement industry through the Lafarge deal. All in all, corporate procurement has had 26 different buyers representing 10 different sectors or industries. The technology industry is what we're seeing under the voluntary market is having cumulatively the highest capacity under contract, closely followed by the oil and gas industry. Overall, when looking at capacity contracted, there's almost a fair share or a fair split between the compliance and voluntary market. Voluntary or compliance, it's pretty clear that the market for corporate renewable procurement is significantly benefiting Alberta through its scale and economic impact. Next slide, please. The renewable energy procurement market is backing projects over $6 billion in capital investment to date and supporting over 6,000 jobs during peak construction. Benefits, the economic impact and the benefits will also be seen in the municipal districts or counties that these projects are hosted in, with over $35 million that could be generated as municipal taxes once all of these projects come online annually. This revenue is more than what renewable energy projects currently provide municipalities, which is around $28 million, according to our municipal tax revenue fact sheet that you can find on our website. Of course, these projects continue to create a ton of economic value through their generation. What do you think, Ben? Do you have any insights on this?
Yeah, for sure. So as you can see on the slide, once fully operating, the 4.1 gigawatt worth of projects with deals will displace 6.5 megatons of carbon dioxide per year, which is worth about $500 million to over $1 billion, depending on the scheduled carbon price in that year. And the projects backed by the deals will also produce more energy than the consumption of all homes in Alberta, as Jordan sort of teased at the beginning, which is actually quite a metric and quite an accomplishment. So this would represent around another $1 billion worth of power to the grid in a year with 2023 power prices, which may have been a relatively unique year, but there's a truism about the Alberta power market. It's that we will see very low pricing, we'll see very high prices, and we'll probably see high prices again. So the value to Alberta's offset users in major industry and Alberta's power consumers is very real. And clearly this has meant big business in Alberta with a business renewables market that has led renewables growth across Canada. But we're going to hand it over to Donnie Downer Carson now to review some of the policy headwinds that renewables are running up against in Alberta.
Thanks, Ben. And maybe just to address the question I just saw in the chat, we're going to focus on Alberta in this section here, but we will talk a bit. We're going to bring Ben back in to talk about some of the other provinces and what we're seeing across Canada. But yes, first maybe a recap in Alberta and this really the second half of 2023, we saw a convergence of several policy reviews with significant implications for renewable energy. So we just want to spend a couple of minutes to reflect on what's happening, what some of the impacts might be, and how that might affect the trajectory in the next several years. Can we go to the next slide, please? So maybe just for a bit of context, taking a bird's eye view of what the trajectory of renewable energy in Alberta has been so far. As a makeup of total Alberta electricity generation, it's been relatively flat until just a few years ago when a lot of projects backed by corporate power purchase agreements or public contracts through the Renewable Electricity Program started coming online. And for context, for those folks who don't know, the Renewable Electricity Program, that was a public procurement initiative that ran from 2016 to 2019 and backed several large wind projects that we're seeing coming online. So since this inflection point, the growth of renewables has quickened, and this past year we saw renewables account for 19% of total generation in province in Alberta. Now, the Alberta government back in 2016 set a goal of 30% by 2030. So 30% of electricity generated in Alberta from renewable sources by 2030. There's an interim target that was met. That was 15% by 2022. And it looks like we're well on our way to soar past the next one, which is 20% by 2025. And for the most part, Albertans are supportive of this growth. We commissioned a survey with Janet Brown in September of last year. This was about a month after the moratorium to get Albertans' opinions on topics including renewable energy. And what we found was 75% of Albertans wanted to see more renewable energy projects in their community, and 70% wanted to see the government do more to encourage wind and solar development in Alberta. And so these are encouraging signs. You can see the full results on our resources page. There's a report there, but the trajectory and the polling, it's encouraging, but there's certainly open questions about what the policy landscape will look like. And to be clear, we're not just talking about the moratorium in Alberta. Next slide here, please. So to give an overview, there's sort of a few different policy review processes right now that are colliding and coming from different angles that are going to impact how projects are carried out in Alberta. We'll just give a quick run through, starting with the moratorium, which is perhaps the most famous and the most headline grabbing. This was August of last year. The Alberta government announced an immediate 7-month-long moratorium on the approvals of renewable energy projects. This was also coupled with an order to the AUC to initiate an inquiry into rules around future projects. And so there's 2 modules for this inquiry. Module A focuses on land impact issues, and the public consultation process wrapped up in December. We're anticipating a report in the near future, but BRC did submit written comments, including a commissioned expert report on agricultural land use, as well as an oral testimony. And you can find our written comments on our website in the resources tab. Module B, which is the bit later, it's coming up. It examines the impact of the growth of renewables on generation supply mix and system reliability. And we're expecting the expert reports in Module B to be released in a couple weeks. Now, Ben, the scope of Module B, it's actually quite similar to the AESO market pathways process, which is something separate, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So the AUC was asked to look into the impact of renewables growth, as you indicated, Carson, on supply mix and reliability. So that's basically, as far as I can tell, virtually 100% Venn diagram overlap with the ASO's executive working group market pathways work, which is looking at electricity market framework reforms necessary to maintain reliability going forward. So the ASO is providing its report to government any time now. And in fact, the AUC's Module B will be considering that report in their inquiry, though it won't be available to the public or participants in that inquiry when it runs. The Module B will run in February.
Okay, great. Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing what comes out of Module B in a few weeks here. And then quickly, the final one to mention is the transmission policy green paper that was released by the Ministry of Affordability and Utilities in November. Yeah, Ben, maybe back to you. From your perspective, what are the big potential changes that are being contemplated?
So that's a big and complex topic, but the big things to keep an eye on that relate to renewables and business renewables procurement is that generators could be expected to curtail their production to deal with congestion on the grid. That's already happening, but there could be different rules around how that is allowed to happen on the grid and implemented. And generators could be stuck with new charges to pay for new grid investments. So both could add new costs and risks for generators, and it could be challenging to divvy up how to share those costs and risks with corporate buyers in the PPA deals. So as yet, don't know where this is going to land, but something definitely to watch for, of course, renewable generators, but also for the business renewables procurement world that BRC sort of leads in the country.
Cool, thanks. Thanks, Ben. And for those who want to learn more about transmission policy or policy in general, I know we only have a few minutes to touch on it today. BRC Canada participants receive an exclusive policy newsletter that comes out every 2 months. So existing participants can look out for that next one sometime in Feb or early March. But in aggregate, so to sum up what we're seeing here, lots of potential regulatory changes in Alberta coming from several different angles. It does remain to be seen how it's all going to shake out. We should find out more soon. But thankfully, though, in the near term, there's actually quite a few projects in the pipeline that are far enough along that likely won't be impacted by most of these changes. So if we can go to the next slide, we can start with the solar side of things. And here we've broken out operational solar projects based on the year they came online, as well as different colors for those that are backed by an offtake agreement, a PPA. And so last year was the first time that more project capacity not tied to a deal came online than with, although it was by a fairly slim margin. 179 megawatts, a little over half of what came online in 2023 was not backed by a PPA. And so that's significant. It's certainly been, solar capacity has certainly been backed majority by PPAs in the past. We're now at 75% of operating capacity that has an announced PPA deal behind it. This time last year, it was 83%. So might indicate a little bit more appetite for merchant exposure. Of the solar projects under construction, there's a significant amount of capacity not yet tied to an announced deal, but this is, fairly typical, we'd say, if you look at the pipeline at any given time. It's likely that many of these agreements just haven't been made public yet, or they haven't made that announcement. But still, at first glance, there's certainly more opportunity here, we would say, than compared to the wind side, which maybe next slide now we can take a look at next. And on the wind graph here, we've got an additional color. I mentioned the renewable electricity program earlier. And so that's backing the projects in green here. And so 2023 was a continuation of strong growth for wind, approximately 860 megawatts of new wind capacity, most of it tied to an offtake agreement, notably from the REP. But for the first time, actually, since 2015, not all of it was. So we had one project, that's Grizzly Bear Creek Wind, that came online this year, and they haven't, at least it hasn't been announced, they don't have an offtake agreement. And so that's significant to note. Again, like the last 8 years, every wind project that's come online has had an announced either PPA or has been part of that REP program. So, I mean, apart from this one-off, it's clear offtake agreements are still critical for Alberta wind build-out. We've got 2 projects under construction that are without an announced deal. The rest of them have been gobbled up. So we'd say corporate buyers looking for wind offtake opportunities that'll come online soon. There doesn't appear to be a lot of options in Alberta. That said, we do still see 750 megawatts pre-construction. So they've gone past the approval stage and they just haven't been marked as in construction yet. So there's certainly still opportunity there. But there also might be other provinces to look at now in terms of whetting buyers' appetites for renewables procurement. If we can go to the next slide, and I'm going to hand it over to Ben here, and he can give an overview of some of the other provinces taking steps to enable some of these deals.
Cool. Thanks, Carson. So, and let me just pause to respond to the question a little bit more around Margaret's section on whether that was just Alberta, and to mention that Margaret's data was focused on business renewables procurement, not just like any type of renewables growth. And so for that reason, up to the end of 2023, that only has taken place in Alberta. So her info was on Alberta alone, but now we'll talk about how that's about to change because 2024 is slated to be an exciting year for what we lovingly and nerdily call jurisdictional expansion. And BRC has played a role in that, and I'll get Carson to fill us in on those BRC activities as we get to those parts. And really, this jurisdictional expansion couldn't come at a better time because, as we'll see on the next slide, as Jordan mentioned in 2022, must have gone backwards. There we go. BRC set a new goal of 10 gigawatts of announced corporate procurement volume by 2030. And as we can see, the deal announcements in Alberta since around 2020 do put us on the right pace to get there. But as Carson just ran through, we can't necessarily rely on Alberta to keep up that pace. So that's where jurisdictional expansion comes into play. BRC chose the 10 gigawatt goal, expecting to see opportunities like bloom outside of Alberta in these orange provinces. And fortunately, other provinces are seizing that opportunity to jump into the game while Alberta hits pause here. So the orange provinces here are the 4 other provinces with significant emissions on their grid. And anywhere you're going to find grid emissions, you'll find corporate and institutional consumers seeking opportunities to reduce their emissions by procuring renewable energy. So far, these provinces haven't actually contributed megawatts to the deal tracker that Margaret presented because their systems weren't open by default like Alberta's, because unlike Alberta, they have closed vertically integrated markets and or central planning of some kind or another. So now we know that with despite that, with a bit of planning and coordination, that need not stop them. Because the Business Renewables Laboratory, that on the next slide, that is Canada's neighbor to the south, has innovated over 50 different, back one slide, please. 50 different policy and program solutions in 30 states with a wide cross-section of different market structures. Those programs are commonly called green tariffs as a group. Though they can have a lot of different proper names, and they have a lot of different levers that you can pull to tailor them to work with different particular electricity systems. And indeed, US states have done that. So Canadian provinces have a lot of models to look at already. And at a high level, the green tariffs can generally be categorized as either subscription model green tariffs that are amenable to many many small corporations or institutions that all buy into a single contract. Sort of managed and planned and chosen through a process of a central authority like a power authority or a crown agency. Or sleeve deal green tariffs that are amenable to large corporate buyers that want a particular say on what they're buying and under what contract terms. And you don't need to choose one or the other because a state or province can do 2 or more of these programs and can offer both types.
Yeah, Debbie Downer cutting in here, Ben. We know how much you love geeking out on green tariffs. BRC actually has a fact sheet series that lays all of these details and design concepts out. We published this early last year. So I would invite the audience to check that out on our resources tab.
All right, thanks for the buzzkill, Carson. So we'll move on to the next slide then. And what's key to watch in 2024 is the development of these programs in Canada's provinces with emitting grids. So Nova Scotia has been the clear leader with a comprehensive, transparent public engagement to develop a subscription model green tariff called the Green Choice Program, or GCP. It's been in the works for a couple of years now, but applications are currently open on both the seller side and the buyer side, and we can expect some announcements for Nova Scotia to get onto to jump onto the deal tracker this year. And at the same time, Nova Scotia has also been engaging with large customers around sleeve deal opportunities. So that's coming along as well. Saskatchewan, meanwhile, has also advanced two types of green tariffs. So first, a subscription model green tariff called the Renewable Partnership Offering, or RPO, which was run as a procurement early last year. And the winning 100 megawatt solar was just announced for the RPO, to feed the RPO, was just announced on Monday of this week. So Saskatchewan will actually be the first province after Alberta to jump onto the BRC deal tracker when it is updated this quarter. And then the first tranche under this program, so they'll be the first to enter, but it'll be quite a bit smaller than Nova Scotia's, and follow-up rounds haven't yet been announced. And then at the same time, SaskPower has also been developing a pilot program in consultation with large industrial customers for a sleeve deal program called the Renewable Access Service. So when I said earlier, there's different proper names for these things. There's a lot of acronyms we can throw around. So in Saskatchewan, subscription model is RPO, sleeve deal model is RAS. But like the RPO, there are some unique rules and restrictions around the amount that customers can sign up for and the costs and risks shouldered when participating, which we haven't really seen in the US states that have had successful programs. So the volumes here could be pretty small, but the jury's still out, and we'll have to watch and see how that evolves this year. And then finally, Ontario recently ran a consultation in the fall around potential amendments to the regulation that governs how their global adjustment is charged to customers. And so those changes would allow corporate PPA buyers to receive fair cost treatment when they enter renewable energy deals to supply the energy that they need. And so in effect, this will enable customer-driven large bilateral deals like a sleeve deal approach.
Yeah, BRC's been active on these fronts. We had a webinar with Leanne Thurber from the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources and Renewables. That was back in October, explaining the Green Choice Program and mentioning of the sleeve deal opportunity in Nova Scotia. So you could find that recording on our resources page. And then just at the tail end of the year, I think it was December 31st that it came out, Jordan had an op-ed in the Globe and Mail about the Ontario effort and what renewables is shaping out to be in Ontario. So we hope to see, we're certainly supportive of the progress being made in Ontario, and we hope to see some implementations in the spring.
And so just to pause for a second to speak to Sam Cheshire's comment or question in the chat, that I think you wrote that when we were talking about Nova Scotia. So with respect to the Nova Scotia sleeve deal program, as far as I know, what is public about that is what was mentioned, to what Carson just mentioned on the BRC webinar. Because, whereas there's often, the point of subscription model green tariffs is to bring in subscribers, to bring in companies that want to buy. And so there's often kind of a more public profile to those types of programs because you're seeking out people to sign up. Whereas there's often less public profile to the sleeve deal opportunities because typically, especially in a jurisdiction like Nova Scotia, there's only a very small handful of consumers that would be large enough to want to engage in their own sleeve deals. So in any case, Carson's point about the webinar with Leanne Thurber from Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources on BRC's resource page, and I imagine somebody from BRC, if you emailed them, could help out with that. And maybe if we have more questions on that, we'll get to that in the questions phase. But so while New Brunswick, you'll notice that from the orange provinces there, still needs to come up to the plate here. But there is every reason to believe that these three provinces that are on this slide will offer plenty to chew on in 2024. So then on the next slide, there's a few other exciting developments to watch for in coming months and years. First, we're seeing corporate buyers drive new, more ambitious approaches to accounting for their renewable energy purchases. So including the 24/7 approach, where buyers match renewable power to the timing of their consumption, which places emphasis on storage. And that's particularly been endeavors that have been kind of most noted or most publicized relating to Google and Microsoft's approaches. And then there's an alternative path that instead emphasizes the actual emissions displaced by the renewable power purchased. And so you're looking at when is it producing on the grid, and so who is it displacing on the grid in those hours, and therefore how much emissions are displaced, rather than a more average annual approach. And then matching that to the buyer's emissions, which most commonly or kind of most popularly known is Amazon's lead with their emissions first partnership.
Yeah, and BRC, we've got a energy storage primer covering some of these trends that's coming soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. We saw one announcement last year with Loblaws and TC Energy for a 24/7 demand matching solution that paired renewables with pumped hydro. Just for the folks interested, it's not on our deal tracker yet. There isn't enough public details on that deal to add in the numbers, but yeah, certainly a point of interest and a trend we might see more of in the coming year.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one to follow. Linking directly between wind and pumped hydro in Alberta will be really interesting to see. And then another clear emerging trend is the expectation for Indigenous equity participation in the renewable energy project. So we've actually only seen one such deal announced in Alberta, so that all that was on the deal tracker up to the end of 2023 is one deal, corporate procurement deal like that. There's other projects in Alberta with Indigenous equity participation, but in the VPPA corporate procurement space, there's one such deal. But it's increasingly the norm for public calls for power, for renewable power, to incent or require Indigenous equity participation and partnerships in the procurement. And that's a trend we've seen in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, likely other jurisdictions as well. So the centrally planned green tariffs are likely to play a role here. And in fact, Saskatchewan's RPO, which they just announced on Monday, did include an Indigenous equity requirement. So this, will jump up onto the deal tracker soon when that deal gets added, or when that RPO program gets added. And it's an expectation. It demonstrates that the expectation for these types of partnerships will clearly take hold, I think, as in the business renewable space too, as we get more of these green tariff programs. So with that, I'll pass it over to Carson to kind of summarize what we've brought to you and wrap up.
Thank you, Ben. Can we flip to the next slide, please? Awesome. So we threw a lot at the audience, at you today. Just wanted to summarize maybe a few of the big takeaways that describe kind of where we're at today with renewables in Canada. The voluntary market, it's clear it's taken the driver's seat and has made 2023 the biggest year ever for VPPAs in terms of generation. This market has created immense economic benefits for Albertans. That's where the deals have been thus far. Corporate buyers have enabled over 35 million in annual municipal tax revenue through their PPAs. And so this directly benefits the local communities and stakeholders beyond just the buyer and developer and landowner. We're in a storm of policy reviews in Alberta, however, with clouds in all directions, including market, transmission, land use policy. And so this has created some short-term uncertainty. We'll have to wait and see what changes come out of all these reviews. But thankfully, there's brand new markets for buyers to find opportunities in. We've got Nova Scotia and Saskatchewan out of the gate with programs of their own, and Ontario is building something as we speak. And so more markets means more opportunity to meet buyer demand, which will all help to accelerate renewable energy development in Canada. Next slide, please. So if you want a little more discussion on the state of the market on top of what we've just gone through today, you can check out our report on our website that we just released. Thank you so much for listening. We'll turn it over for a bit of Q&A here, maybe about 10 minutes or so. Margaret, maybe I'll flip it over to you because I think we had some questions that the audience submitted ahead of time.
Yeah, we got a couple of questions on the chat as well. So I can maybe take a few of those and then go to the ones that the audience had asked before the session. So we have a question. Has BRC found that the standards for certifying megawatt hours in compliance markets significantly more rigorous than the standards for certifying the same in voluntary markets?
Yeah, that's so they're more onerous. And what, my awareness of this is I guess strongest on compliance markets in the Alberta, which is certainly the most developed compliance market for offsets in Canada. I'm not as familiar with the many US jurisdictions that have renewable portfolio standards and what that looks like there. But essentially, in Alberta, you're actually just like anything that the offset protocol requires is layering on top of, voluntary market certification, because you have to certify your RECs, and then you have to retire them with the province in order to generate those offsets. So then the offset protocol is additional to, not a replacement of, essentially the REC certification. And the offset protocol in Alberta is very mature. It's had a lot of activity under it. And I think that you do find that there's a certain level of onerousness for very small projects that make it sort of just not worth it and too difficult. But a lot of developers have developed either in-house expertise or contract out to experts that work on the offset, within the offset protocol regimes directly. And so certainly more onerous, but I don't think that has been a serious inhibitor to projects to work through the paperwork and the administrative burden of doing that, unless you're a very, very, very small project, and in which case, that burden of hiring outside can just become too costly for the, it just doesn't work on without the economies of scale. But that would be very small. And then there's some limitations with respect to how the offset protocol works in Alberta, where if you have a project that's like a single stage project that's kind of all metered as one entire project, you're retiring all of your RECs with the province. So your only option, if you're going the offset protocol route under the compliance market, is to retire all of your RECs and only produce offsets. So you can't actually divvy up your project between compliance and voluntary, although I understand, and so for all I know, I missed it, but I understand that the province has been working on a solution to that to kind of overcome that sort of perverse outcome, because of course projects can make generators can make two different deals with two different buyers. We've seen that in our market, but those have typically been isolated to one, either the voluntary market or the compliance market. I think they've actually all been voluntary market deals so far. So, there should be no reason that you couldn't enter a compliance market and a voluntary market deal for the same project, but that has had some administrative challenge.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you for that. I'll ask one more question from the chat and then go over to the other questions. But okay, we have one here. Would the potential renewables in Ontario be the largest, just given the size of the market?
Yeah, I'm interested in, Margaret and Carson, if you have thoughts on this as well. I often look at, there's two kind of metrics that you can scale this to, Donald. So you can scale it to the grid size, which is what you're suggesting in your question, or you can suspect that buyers will have more interest in renewable energy procurement in jurisdictions that have higher emissions, so that you can claim against the emissions that you're offsetting in those jurisdictions. So it kind of depends on how much you think buyers are looking at that, in terms of, are they just counting up RECs in order to meet a 100% renewables goal, or are they actually looking at how much they're offsetting for emissions and applying those offsets against their scope 2? And if the latter, then presumably you would drive more interest in more carbon intensive grids. And Ontario's grid, relative to the others that we spoke about, is relatively low carbon intensity. But there's a strong argument in Ontario, and of course, like you say, it's just by far the biggest. But there's also a strong argument in Ontario. This is kind of harder to quantify, but there's, I think, a strong argument that Ontario was looking at having to do significant new gas generation, and that certainly was in some of their prior plans, although even that is in flux, as we've seen in recent months, in terms of what Ontario's kind of scope and outlook looks like for where its grid is going. So I think there was an argument that, well, Ontario is going to create more emissions in their market that can be displaced, and therefore that will drive attention to the Ontario market. But in any case, I've probably spoken too long already, but I'll just say your question is interesting.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump into it. I would agree with Ben. It kind of remains to be seen, but certainly like the buyer's interest to purchase in the jurisdiction where they're operating is sort of a big driver. And so if there's a lot of industrial activity in Ontario, then certainly we would see some of that demand pull. Because we also hear of interest in other jurisdictions where the grid is much less carbon intensive, yet there appears to be demand for direct procurement. So there's certainly other factors at play beyond sort of grid intensity and carbon displacement.
Thanks, Ben and Carson. There are a few questions around voluntary and compliance markets, and I want to just direct the BRC resource library. Like, there's a bunch of resources where we kind of elaborate on these. So I would suggest going over a few of the webinars or some reports, which would be helpful just because we are running out of time right now. I think we can take one more question and then we can close the session. So yeah, so I have a question from one of the participants that had submitted it earlier. It is, how do you see the market barriers in Alberta evolve? Where in Canada do you see the most potential and tangible options for corporation? I feel like we already addressed this. So how do you see the market barriers in Alberta evolve? Let's go with that.
Yeah, it's a massive question mark at the moment. And it's quite clear, and this relates to Patrick Beatty's question in the chat as well. But it's quite clear that there is sort of a good amount of momentum in Alberta for some fairly substantial system change in order to advanced reliability. It's coming at a bit of an ironic moment because we're about to see something like 900 megawatts of new combined cycle capacity come on in the province, and then an additional cogeneration of a similar scale sometime later. So as is very common in the Alberta market, you go through supply gluts and then supply tight and supply gluts, and that's the nature of an energy-only market that is fairly weakly interconnected to any surrounding jurisdiction or neighboring jurisdictions. So we're about to actually see the energy-only market resolve that reliability challenge, frankly. But nevertheless, there's a lot of momentum towards these changes. I'm not going to speak to Patrick's specific question. I'm not going to speak on behalf of BRC for views on the capacity market, but in general, I think to question that Margaret brought up, yeah, I mean, it's a big open question at the moment, and we are maybe a matter of weeks or just a couple of months away from a lot more certainty on what these changes could mean for trying to create VPPAs. If we end up with an Ontario-style market of central procurement or long-term contracts, then you're taking so much value out of the energy market that you end up not being able to see renewables proceed without centrally planned calls for power. So if that's on the table, we'll need to see how that hashes out before we can kind of comment there. And then in terms of the provinces where there's opportunity, I mean, Nova Scotia is very active and at a pretty big scale, particularly for the size of the province. Saskatchewan's active, starting with a relatively small scale, but kind of learning as they go, and hopefully that can scale up. In Ontario, again, we're kind of a few short weeks, I think, or maybe a couple months, I guess. They were promising May as when they would figure out their global adjustment regulation. So just a few short months away from kind of just ascertaining what the scale of development opportunity is there as well. Any thoughts, Carson?
No, all good.
Yeah, hopefully this year and or the next year state of the market, we'll have new provinces on our deal tracker. So exciting. Yeah, I think I'll pass it on to Carson to close out.
Sure, sounds good. Shannon, maybe could we get onto the next slide, please? We just want to sort of do a reflection of the year and then maybe look ahead at next year. So 2023 it was a big year for us for BRC. We really expanded our event offerings, our policy involvement, and our educational content output. We started a regular blog series. We have a new policy newsletter started at the end of the year. Again, that's just for participants. And we had our in-person forum back in the spring. And so our community has grown now. We're over 50 participant organizations. I do want to thank everyone here in the webinar and also our everyone signed up for our newsletter and who visits our website. Thanks so much for the interest and support. We've got much more in store for 2024. I might plug some of our events that are coming up on the next slide briefly. Thank you. Jordan mentioned it at the top, but our forum in the spring is back. So it's going to be in Calgary in April. Stay tuned, subscribe to our newsletter to be alerted for when registration opens up for that. It did sell out last year, and so certainly it's going to be a popular event this year, so you'll want to be on top of the ball and getting registered. And we do have our webinar series back for the first half of this year. So more to come on how to register for some of these events as details get ironed out, but certainly stay tuned. We've got a lot of good educational webinars coming up. With that, I want to close out here and thank you so much for tuning in. It's great to see so many people interested in renewables in 2024. I know there's lots in store across the country, and so we're happy to have a voice and play a role in that. Do reach out if you'd like to get in touch. I think, yes, Margaret just threw the link in the chat, and also you can reach out to our email addresses here if there's any follow-up you'd like to do. Maybe we'll leave it here for 30 seconds so you can copy down any contact info. But that's all we have for you today. Thanks so much, and hope to see some of you soon.